it's something really to understand about the not self is that it should be the easiest to write because it's literally what everybody lives. But the moment that you get into the true self, you get into very, very deep complexities and layers. The fact of the matter is that what we are in terms of our imprinting is that we are all deeply unique, and this is the uniqueness that you get to see on the surface. It's only the beginning, by the way. I mean, one of the most extraordinary things about the science of human design, differentiation, is the ability to be able to see at deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper levels how each of us are truly, truly unique in our programming, the way in which we have been imprinted genetically. What you're looking at when you look at this, and you look at this definition that is running down here through the center, and you look at all of these little activations that are there, everything about that is that those are the aspects that are intended to be specialized in. I mean, that's really what it's about. Each and every one of us, in a sense, is a genetic specialist. You know, we all have this very, very unique, specific way in which we're intended to live through the process, take in the process, cognitive about the process, all of these things. And it begins with recognizing that when you're looking at definition, to begin with, you're looking at the only thing that is reliable. It is probably the most important term to understand about definition, because the lack of definition is inconsistency. When there is definition, there is reliability. And it's reliability not in the sense that it's good or it's bad, or it's right or it's wrong. It's always the same. It's consistent throughout the life. It is something you can rely on to always be there. Always. I mean, when you think about the not self and you think about decision making, you realize that you're making decisions based on something that is always inconsistent. You know, therefore you run into all the problems. But the moment that you're dealing with your definition, you're dealing with what is consistent. It is what you are here to live out. Everybody has their truth buried in their definition. And in those cases where you happen to be a reflector, it's there too. It's in the gates. Wherever you see an activation, it's so important to think about just, you know, the wheel itself. In this case, you know, if you look at the body graph and you look at all the numbers in the body graph, every single one of those numbers has a connection to what we call codons in genetics. All of it is about essential ingredients to the entire life process. When you look at your chart and, like in this case, you don't have the 36 gate, it doesn't mean that you don't have that chemistry in your body. What it means is that that chemistry is what you have receptors to. This is what you're open to. We have to be open to what we are not. This is how we take in the holistic whole. But we also have what is very specifically our highlight. In other words, you know, you take a muscle cell and a blood cell. You know, they're both cells. And you go down there into the code. And if you go into the center and you go to the whole layout of the code, everything's in the code. That's why we have the potential to clone. Everything is there in every single cell. But you know, blood cells and muscle cells never get confused in terms of the way in which they are imprinted to operate. The same cell with all the same information only comes out as this kind of cell or that kind of cell. That's us. These are cells. In that sense, as an analogy, and that we all have a unique imprint. We carry the whole code, recognize that. That's why everything we don't have seems to be so, I want it, you know? We have the receptors for it. We're really open to that. Here, when you look at anything that is fixed, if you're operating according to your strategy, what happens is that everything that you're doing is based on what is reliable in your design. And remember that it's reliable from the moment you come into the world to the moment you leave this plane. There's nothing else like it. It is the only thing you can trust. It is the only thing that you can trust to guide you to what is correct for you. There is nothing else that can do that. So when we're looking at definition, the first thing we have to see is that this is the beginning of understanding how to write literally what we are. And of course, what we are goes beyond the obvious. It goes beyond centers. It ends up with types and channels and all kinds of information, profiles. You know, you look at your Sun Earths. When I first started to teach human design here in Wien 15 years ago, the very first thing I taught people was the cross of life. You know, you had the sun above and you had the earth below and you had the south node over here and you had the north node over here, you know, and here you had the cross of life. And it's something to grasp. 70% of what you are is your Sun Earth. It's 70% of your programming. 70% of it. And in order for you to be able to live out what is ever there in your profile, people's ideas of incarnation crosses and blah, 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 now the only way that you can ever live that out is if you're operating correctly according to what your reliable imprint is. You know, it's like coming into the world and you're supposed to be a muscle cell and you keep on screaming, yeah, but I want to be a blood cell. I mean, imagine what our bodies would be like if our muscle cells decided that they wanted to be something else. No, I want to be a bone marrow cell. I think that's cool, you know? I mean, we would have totally dysfunctional bodies instantaneously. Fortunately, it doesn't work that way. But we are, after all, a holistic, self-reflected consciousness. And because of the way the mind works, the way the not-self works, that we end up paying attention to all of those things that are receptors, that the receptors become more important than our imprint. So all of this is about beginning the process of beginning to see who you actually are, because that's what this trip is all about, is to begin to literally lay out at a very, very superficial level, it's a really superficial level, to lay out what is there in the imprint so that you can begin to see what the possibility is for that being. When you understand the imprint, you can see how it leads to the purpose. I mean, there's no purpose in life if you're operating through your mind. There's none. Because any concept of purpose for you is rooted in the not-self and all its problems. You know, I want to have this purpose because I want to attract attention. You know, I want to have this purpose, you know, because I want to avoid confrontation and truth. I think that purpose is good because it allows me to hold on to what isn't good for me, and it goes on and on and on and on. Instead of what is in fact the true purpose of the being. Every single being has a geometry, has a fractal line, has a direction of fulfillment in this life when they operate correctly on the physical plane. It's what we forget. It's what we always forget. Because we're caught with our minds and our eyes. And we don't understand that navigating this material plane is not about your mind's concept of it. Because your mind doesn't know how to navigate this material plane. This is not reliable. But how to navigate the material plane is always there in the definition. When I look for the potential of the true being, the first thing that I look at is type. You have to start with your type. I mean, after all, it's the only key. If you know, type is what tells us what our strategy is. I mean, it doesn't lead us directly necessarily to what is the authority of that. It starts with the basic strategy. So the first thing to understand about incarnating on this plane is that you're all given a specific mechanical strategy. Let's start with generators. I am caught between loving them and hating them. Now, I'm a manifester, so you got to see it from my perspective. See, when I was given the knowledge and I looked at what it meant to be, you know, a crazy person who had a voice tell them how everything works, that I figured I'd better show that this works very quickly, you know? I mean, otherwise, nothing's ever going to happen. And I figured the easiest thing is generators. The easiest thing. I mean, my standing joke, they're the only holy people. I don't mean to offend projectors and manifestors, And reflectors, those of us who are non-sacral, if you are a sacral being, this is your world. It's not mine, not the projectors, not the reflectors. And the first thing to understand about type is that type is lived out through its aura. Through its aura. If you're a generator, you have an enveloping aura. An enveloping aura. In other words, when you step into the aura of a generator, they are taking your entire auric field in. Totally. So the first thing that leads to is an understanding that generators are more deeply conditioned than any other type. More deeply conditioned than reflectors, and it doesn't seem possible, but it's true. Because reflectors have a Teflon aura. It's very different. If you're a generator, you come into the world with an enveloping aura. This is your first thing to recognize. And because it's an enveloping aura, because there is such a deep level of conditioning due to that, because you take people in so deeply, it is so difficult for generators to stop being manifestors. It is so difficult for generators to stop being anything but what they are. The most difficult thing I thought, because when all this happened to me, there were many, many people that I had known in my life in that era, all kinds of spiritual people, all kinds of this and that, and gurus and blah, 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 and all of this stuff. And all of them, talking about, the cliches of how things come to you and, all of this kind of stuff. And then I look at generators. And you see, generators are so perfect. I mean, it's what infuriates me about them, because most of the time I'd like to slap them because they're so perfect and they're so stupid. And I'm not talking about intelligence, because in most cases, the smarter you get, the dumber you get. I mean, these are beings that can have an absolutely perfect life. Perfect, absolutely perfect. All they have to do is respond. And I thought, shit, that's going to be easy, right? I got to grab one of these generators and say, look, stop initiating. Just wait. Life is going to give you everything you need. Yeah. How many readings I went through with generators, telling them about, if you want love in your life, you got to wait for it to come to you. You want a career in your life, you got to wait for it to come to you. You want anything in this life, you got to wait for it to come to you. You can't go get it. You can't go get anything. And the moment you go for something, you're lost. And you stop being holy and you stop being perfect. See, if you're a generator, all the cliches that we have in religions get lived out. Jesus' line, witness the lilies of the field, they do not toil. Yeah, how sweet. This is a generator world. If all the generators on this planet with their enveloping auras were only responding, everybody on this planet would be correct, because we depend on them. I mean, the world that I live in is a world full of frustration. I blame all the generators, because most of the generators are not self, which means their enveloping aura carries nothing but frustration. Nothing but frustration. And frustration layers everything on this planet. Everything. Generators. So the moment that you look at this being and you see that this being is a generator, that the first thing to understand in describing this code is that everything begins with response. When I respond, bang, 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 bang. And if it doesn't begin with when I respond, and I'm telling you this from my experience of teaching this course, because every time I teach this course and people start writing their true self, they leave out their type. It's so odd. You see, the criteria for getting to the truth here is that it begins with one thing and one thing only. Through response, I. In response, I. And it can only begin with that. Because if that isn't there, you don't get the rest. If you're just writing out all the activations like people love to do in design, you know, they open up the Rave I Ching, as if that means anything to them. As if they think they can add up all those lines and that's them. Not true. Remember, people live out their not self. And all the gates they don't have. That's what's important to them. I mean, there's something to grasp. So if you're a projector, through invitation, I. If you're a manifester, through informing, I. If you're a reflector, through waiting out the lunar cycle, I. But this is the beginning of your code. It's like the capital letter at the beginning. You know, this is the start place. And if you don't start there, you get nowhere. I mean, this is the thing to understand. It's why it's so important, you know, that when you're writing your code, it starts with, when I respond, I get, as I respond, through response, whatever the case may be. But to understand that this is the beginning of the process, because everything else is derived from it. Everything else. When we look at this being at a simple level here, you know, we have this connection between the G center and the sacral, you know, and you have a channel here that's called the channel of rhythm, the channel of being in the flow. When I respond, I am in the flow. It's not I'm in the flow, because it's not true. It's not true at all. This being can only be in the flow because they've responded. So when this person is looking at their, you know, writing their code, you have to see that when you see how it starts, you get to understand something. Everything else gets delivered. You see, your strategy is a holistic, mechanical strategy. It touches everything. It is the sum total of what's there. And the moment that you're operating out of the strategy, you get what's there. You've got a channel here of mutation. When I respond, I mutate the flow. When I respond, the flow mutates me. And on and on and on and on and on. But only when I respond. And you see, most people, when they look at definition, they say, aha, they got the channel of being in the flow and they got the channel of mutation. Very nice. Thank you very much. But it doesn't mean anything if it doesn't begin with the response. Because if the response isn't there, then you end up in the open centers. You don't end up making decisions out of what is fixed. So you begin to get something about the true self. Is that the true self begins with an action. And the action, we're going to call it in a sense, it is the central theme. Through response, through informing, through the invitation, on and on and on. This is the opening. And only then can you begin to follow the flow. We're looking at this particular design in the wheel, and you can see that this person is a 4-6, an opportunistic role model. Now, you know what people are like with their profiles? Oh, I'm a 3-5, I'm a 2, you know, I'm a 9-0, I don't know, whatever you are. But the fact of the matter is, it's not true. In response, I'm an opportunistic role model. Without response, I'm a fucked up not self. Because it's just the way it is. And only then can you see that if you're going to fulfill your purpose, your action must be correct. It has to be. Without that, you get nowhere. And you know, I know that people are interested in their incarnation crosses and their purpose and all of that. I wish you all well on the journey. I hope you get there. But you get there when it's correct. You get there when it comes out of what is correct. Right angle cross of consciousness. Now, these can be some of the most confused people on the planet. I know them well. I mean, really, confused people. Because their heads are up there in this very strange place, you know, that doesn't always come down to earth. Eh? And yet it can also be something that is absolutely profound, after all. I mean, the cross of consciousness is the knowledge of Solomon. You know, everything under the sun. It is possible for the cross of consciousness to be able to go through and process the whole plane of consciousness. Blah, 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 all that stuff. But, you cannot be the opportunistic role model that can fulfill the potential of consciousness unless you've responded in the first place. You have to respond. Generators they're the only type that have the responsibility built into them to know themselves. You know Delphi, you know the famous Delphi. It used to say for generators only. I mean, somebody tore down the sign. Because that's the truth. Know thyself is a generator business. I mean, you know, when you think about the way in which different types operate. You know, a manifestor like me, I'm not interested in knowing myself. I'm interested in knowing how much impact I can have on you. If you're a projector, you're not interested in knowing yourself. You're interested in knowing everybody else. If you're a reflector, you don't want to know yourself. You just want to understand the program and what's going on. But if you're a generator, you're here to know yourself. The mapping of the self for a generator is enormously important. Think about the sacral. Aside from so many of the obvious things about it, it actually makes sounds. It communicates. I mean, only generators are blessed with such a thing. I mean, you know, I'm non-sacral. My authority is in my splenic system. I mean, it is a very subtle thing. It is just simply a spontaneous, existential yes or no. And long ago I accepted that I have no idea why it does that. One moment it says yes to something, and the next moment it'll say no to the same thing. You know, it's the spleen. But you got a sacral sensor, you can talk to it. It has a language. It has enormous power. The vast majority of sacral beings have atrophied sacrals. I know generators that don't even know they have those sounds. So this person comes up to you and says, I'm going to help you. And they're not going to help you at all. You didn't ask them. No, if you didn't ask them, they're not responding. If they're not responding, they're initiating. If they're initiating, they're not correct. So you need to begin to see that the first step always begins with your type. Pure generator. And pure generator, please do not confuse this terminology. It doesn't mean that a pure generator is better than an emotional generator, which is what the difference is. But all this means is that this is a generator that has not lost its authority. If you're an emotional generator, your sacral has to bow down to your emotions. If you're a pure generator, you're operating only out of the pure response of the sacral, so that the sacral actually becomes not only your strategy, but your authority. So here in this case, we have someone who is a pure generator, so we know that everything for them, their strategy, their authority, is all rooted in whether they're going to respond or not. If this was an emotional generator, our opening sentence would be very different. Instead of, in response, I do this, In response, over time, I do this or do that. Over time. And over time is simply the fact that if you have a defined emotional system, there is no truth in the now. None. Not possible. So every decision takes time. Time. Now, obviously, in this case, we're not talking about somebody who is emotional. But again, you have to see the criteria. So if you're an emotional projector, you know, the invitation over time leads to this and that. Over time, after the invitation, leads to this and that. In other words, you need to bring in what is the authority along with the actual strategy. Now, the fact of the matter is, despite the fact that people would like to make authority more complex than it is, and it's not, is that considering that 67% of humanity is generators, that strategy right away gets simplified, that 50% of them are emotional, so we know that 50% of humanity have emotional authority. In other words, the vast majority of beings are either sacral or emotional, one or the other. And just about, you know, the great majority of the code on this planet begins with response. It's so difficult for human beings to trust the forces. I mean, it's so difficult. I've watched. I have an emotional generator sitting with me. And I say to her, if you want to find love in this life, you got to wait for it to come. And then you got to send it away. And wait for it to come back. And if you're not ready, send it away until you're clear. And they look at you as if you're crazy. I mean, what am I going to do? There's this person. Seems perfect for me in the moment, right? You know, and then you say to them, look, if you want what is correct for you, this is the only way you can do it. And they don't believe it. It's not so much they don't believe it, is that they don't trust it. What they trust is being a manifester. I see so many diseased generators who are manifestors. You know, they're the busiest, running around, initiating this, starting that. I mean, talk about meeting resistance. See, it's a physical plane. You know, if you're moving along and you've got a square face thing in front of you, you use up enormous energy pushing through. It gets so difficult. It's such a burden. When you're operating according to your strategy, you're streamlined. There is no resistance on the physical plane. It just goes by. But you have to give up initiating. I mean, this is the only way for a generator. There is no other way. None of this works unless you start with response. For adults, it takes a lot of courage. It does. I realize what that means for adults that have lived their whole lives in the false impression that they're supposed to take care of business instead of business taking care of them. You know, if you're a generator, the Druids were right. Do without doing, everything gets done. You know? You don't have to do it. It does you. And it always will do you if you let it. And what you get is precisely what is correct for you. Okay. Single definition. If you have single definition, you don't have to mention it in your code. But if you don't have single definition, you have to mention it because it's a problem. So let's begin with split definition. Somewhere around 45% of humanity are split definitions, about 41% are single definition, but 11% are triples. There's very few quads, percentage-wise. The vast majority of splits that you meet are going to be straightforward, ordinary split definitions, two aspects separated from each other. So what does that mean? If you're a split definition, your whole life is about bridges. Bridges. And what I'm referring to is bringing your split together. That you will spend your entire life, you will, finding a way to bridge those two aspects. So it means that if you're a split definition and you happen to be, in this case, a generator, that the fact is that through response, I can be in the flow with the right other. Through response with the right other, I get this, that, the other. And that other can be the right other as a lover, the right other as a friend, the right other as a colleague, whatever it may be. But the fact is that only through your response can you find the bridge that's going to make the difference in your life. So split definitions need the other. And of course you can see that if you look at a split, any way the split can be joined becomes a deep, deep area of conditioning. Even more powerful in a split definition than just an open center. Because it's something that you're really looking for. I want to be whole. I want to pull these aspects together. And it is split definitions, the 45% of humanity, that make the greatest mistakes in their relationships. Because the not self ends up with any bridge will do. As long as it's there. As long as I have the bridge. So if you're a split definition, it's built into the formula. It's there. In response, I can find wholeness through the right other. In response, I can be in the flow with the right other. In response, I can mutate, and it goes on and on. The right other brings the potential for me to mutate, the potential to be in the flow. Or whatever the case may be, after all. If you're a triple split, it's very different. Triple splits have a very difficult time accepting any single bridge. So if you're a triple split and you have a partner that happens to hook up your triple split that does not get an Academy Award. Because in fact, you're not going to enjoy it in the same way a split definition enjoys having their split bridged. Triple splits need to move through auras. They cannot be stuck in that sense with any single aura. Moving through auras comes the response to be and it goes on and on and on. In other words, again, as you saw yesterday, it's just about bringing the keynotes together, but you have to see what the priorities are. For me, when I look at a channel in terms of the code, I think in terms of verbs. In other words, that the channel is a verb. So for example, if you looked at this design, let's say we're looking at the 15.5, there's the verb, and these little gates that are hanging out of the center, they become adjectives. They become descriptive of the verb itself. So here you can see that this is a person where the verb is to be in the flow. And all the criteria that we have seen with this. In other words, in response, I am in the flow. But it's more than being in the flow. That flow is being conditioned by what are called hanging gates. That is, gates that are active, but they do not fill the whole channel. So if you take the example of that first gate there, or the seventh gate, they become part of the information that is part of this channel. They add their value to it. So for example, the seventh gate is about the ability to find your leadership potential. And this being can be a leader in the flow. In response, they can be in the flow and lead others. Because the 7 is there. The 1 is there. In the flow, they are deeply creative. They can be creative leaders in the flow out of response. No response, no creative leadership, no flow. Because that's the key. Okay, so here we have the 2 defined channels. So we have the 2 verbs that are here. And they are, they're joined together in that sense. So what we have is this combination of, this is not simply somebody who's here to be in the flow. This is somebody who's here to be mutative in the flow. Here is somebody who can mutate the flow. Here is somebody where the flow mutates them. In other words, all of the combinations that you can come up with, because it doesn't matter which way you do it, you just get a different picture, but it is all about the same thing. This is the intended action of this being. They are here to be mutative in the flow beings. So if they're operating correctly, that collective 15-5 channel of rhythm is going to pull other people into their flow, and they are going to be able to mutate them. Or they create a mutative flow that attracts other people to them. It's their power. And remember, they're an opportunistic role model. And as an opportunistic role model, they have the opportunity to mutate other people's flows if they're responding. And if they're not responding, they can't do that. These are the 3 hanging gates. You see them here, the 1, the 7, and over here you see the 27. So these are the 3 adjectives to this complex verb structure. In other words, what we're looking at is the army. You can think about that in terms of leadership role. So the potential of being a nourishing, creative leader. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? I mean, it does. Right? A creative, nurturing leader who brings you mutation in their flow, as long as you ask them in the first place. As long as they're responding. And the moment that they're responding, you begin to get the attribute that's there. And remember that this is the surface because it's going to be a line. And it's really a surface because there's motivation underneath. There's color, there's tone, there's bass. I mean, it's amazing where you go in differentiation. You get the adverbs to the adjectives, and it goes on and on and on. But here on the surface, to begin to see your layout. It's your plan. I mean, it's the plan of what you are designed for. We're all designed for something. So here is a being that you can see right away, wow, this would be really nice, wouldn't it? You have this wonderful, creative, nourishing, role model leader that's going to take you and embrace you with their enveloping aura and pull you into this wonderful new mutative rhythm in response. So when you're writing the code, you have to see the priorities, You have to start with the type, the authority, you go to the definition, you go to the attributes, you start going down this track of laying it out. And by the way, for some of you, it'll be incredibly complex because you have a lot of centers, you got a lot of gates. Told you it'd be more difficult to do. Got a lot of centers, got a lot of gates. It's a lot of stuff to write. I mean, I can remember when I did the first one in Madrid, and it was delicious. I mean, it really was. And when we went through this process, I mean, the stuff that people wrote, it was really incredible because there's so much information you can tap into, and you're writing about yourself. I mean, you get to see what's really there. I mean, what can be there, what you can live out. And of course, the other thing to understand is that you don't have to work at that. That's the beauty. You don't have to work at any of those attributes. You simply have to follow the strategy that starts it all. And everything falls into place because the strategy isn't just picked out of thin air. It's the byproduct of the configuration. It is the synthesis. So you follow the strategy, you get the rest of the stuff. And it doesn't mean, by the way, that this creative, nurturing leader that can mutate you in the flow is going to be the leader of the Western world. They can do the same thing in their life, their family, their friends, whatever. They can fulfill their purpose through whatever that is. We have all of these various levels. And how satisfying to live out your nature. I mean, just to live out your nature. I mean, I'm here to structure the initiation of awakening in the now. That's my true self. It's just a couple of channels. And yet the moment that you truly live out your life, you get to see, gee, that's odd. Look at that. That's exactly what I do. That's exactly what I've become. We're all here to become ourselves. And you don't get there through, I'm going to work on my mutative qualities, You got to work on being you, strategy, and authority. In this particular case, this is just to show you the line variations that are there that are part of the design. And of course, again, we're going to a deeper level. By the way, I don't want you to do this. I mean, you can play with it. This is the kind of thing that, it's months of work to really do this and really get to the point where you don't just do it one way once. I've done mine probably 20 to 30 variations of the same, you different pieces in different ways, and you turn them around, and it's fantastic because it's all there. It's all us. I mean, we're really incredible creatures because it's all there. So when you start getting down to this level and you say, well, see, there's a 3 on that 7. This is an anarchist. This is a nourishing anarchist. This is a nourishing anarchist that's going to mutate you into their rhythm if they respond to you. It could have been the first line, it could have been an authoritarian, it could have been the Democrat, it could have been any of the variations that are there in the line. And it's a third line, it's trial and error. I have trial and error as an anarchistic, nourishing leader trying to be in the flow and mutating people when I respond. And the same thing is true for any of the others. And of course, you have third line themes and sixth line themes, and you can pick on this item and you can pick on that one. And you can begin to see that these adjectives are very, very subtle. They bring real nuances. I mean, I'm a 7-3, I'm so different from people who are, 7-4s or whatever. I mean, to be an anarchist is to be an anarchist. I happen to be, by the way, a democratic administrating anarchist. I have 3 7s. So my adjectives get quite confused, And I can move those around in many different ways. I mean, I have Mars in the administrator, so I'm an immature administrator. I have Saturn in the anarchist. Can you imagine? I mean, if you know anything about Saturn, the last place that Saturn would be is an anarchist. So I'm a Saturnian anarchist, which is rather dangerous, I think. But anyway, and I have the Democrat. I have Pluto in the Democrat. You can go to nuances that are absolutely fantastic. And it's just following the thread. And it's knowing where it starts. See, when I was sitting alone underneath my tree after my experience, the pressure was on me to be a manifester. I had never been a manifester. I'd never lived my manifester's life. As a matter of fact, I had been nothing but a conditioned generator. I grew up with generators, I lived with generators, I married generators, I had children with generators. I never got to live what it was to be a manifester. And there I was, all alone with all this knowledge, and how was I supposed to get it out? I had to inform. If I didn't inform people that it happened to me, I never would have lived it out. I had to do that. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to. I didn't want to be a manifester. I didn't. I didn't want to live it out. I didn't want to be the freak. I didn't want to be the one who knew, blah, 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 all that stuff. Of course, you can't escape the fates. And you can't escape the forces. Informing changed my life. And because I was unemotional, I was one of the most secretive beings. I told no one anything. Nobody who knew me, knew nothing about me. My family, my friends, nobody knew anything. I never told anybody anything. If you don't tell them, you never have any confrontation. You know? You just tell them nothing. And I was a very, very sick manifester. Informing saved my life. And a few other people, I think. You know? And it's the thing to really understand about what it is to see your formula and understand what's there in you, because I am not special. And the moment you think that, you're a fool. I may be different. That's what differentiation is all about. And I get to fulfill my purpose. But you all have that. You do. It's really something to grasp. That potential is in every single human being the moment that they just listen to their code. And it's so simple because it starts at the beginning. You don't, whatever level of human design that you have at this point, you take it to the level you know. You just follow the line and you get to that place where you can begin to see this imprint that's you. And then you look at your not self and you see what you missed. What you missed. The magic of genetic continuity. Everything hangs on strategy and authority. Everything. And out of strategy and authority, you get the genetic continuity that allows all of this to bubble through in its uniqueness. I'm only an unusual leader because I have 3 aspects of the 7th gate. And they become very weird when you mix them all together. And they become an expression of my kind of leadership when I'm correct. Everybody has these kinds of things. Everybody has these incredible nuances to the way in which they are here to fulfill their purpose, and you don't get to the purpose without it. And it's not like writing this code means anything, quite frankly. It's a wonderful exercise because it begins to introduce you to yourself. But it's there to teach you that it all begins in the same place. It's why human design can be offered to any idiot at just the strategy level, and it'll change their life. They don't have to study it. They don't. All, in fact, they have to do is try it to recognize that it's better than what they were doing before or the way they were doing it. But what they're actually getting the moment they're experimenting, even if they know nothing about all of this, they get all of that. Because that's who you are. That's your imprint. That's you, the muscle cell, It's all there, and there's no more confusion about being a blood cell and a brain cell and a toenail cell. You get to live out that perfection. And there's nothing like it. Nothing. The holiest thing that I understand out of all of human design is the fact that everything is unique. That really impresses me. As a freak, as a manifester, I hate comparison. It's a terrible thing, this comparing business. Because you can never succeed. There is always something better. There's always something worse. It's always that way. There is nothing you can do, and it's never fair. Comparison is an ugly, ugly, ugly thing that we were all raised with. Why can't you be like? Always. And at the moment that you're able to operate here, no comparison. There's nothing like it. Nothing. See, the word uniqueness for me means perfection. That's what it means. Not comparative perfection. You know, you're more beautiful than me. It's not comparative at all. It is unique perfection beyond comparison. What are you going to compare it to? You can't. The only time you have comparison is when people live the not self. You know, it was like all of you last night with your open this or that. You know, you can compare how fucked up you are, relatively speaking. No, my open heart center did more damage to me than it did to you. You know? This is our comparison world. But here, there's no comparison. And I mean, this is only the surface. Please understand, this is only the surface of differentiation. Think about every single aspect in this body graph. Understand that every single aspect goes down many, many levels. Color, tone, base. In the work that I'm doing right now at the IHDS, we're teaching chains. I'm teaching chains. The chain of the tone to the color to the line. There's 216 variations on the personality side, 216 variations on the design side, and that's only about the Sun-Earth. We are incredibly differentiated. And yet all we get to live out is the homogenization so that everybody with an open ego says, hey, look, we all have the same problem. Instead of we all have a unique life. And a unique truth. I'm not the sole repository of truth. But the truth in all of you is hidden. Where is it? I mean, where is it? It's the byproduct of being correct. And when you begin to look deeper and deeper and deeper, you see what a being is here to do. And again, to see it at any level. You don't have to exalt it to greatness. It's not about that. It isn't. It may be your incarnation to fulfill your purpose in a very small, tight, nondescript, mundane role, and yet be totally fulfilled in that process. And it may be the opposite, or anything in between, because we have to have everything. Everything. Here is an example of basic keynote stringing. A self-sufficient anarchistic role model in the flow, responding to sustained externalizing of the acceptance of transition to a new pattern. Oh, it's wonderful. You know? And it's magic, because when you start doing, you know, first you do it for yourself, but I'm not just giving this to you for yourself. It's so that you can see other people. That you can help them begin to see themselves, because you can just write their code out. You write their code out, you know them. You know, if you write their not self and you write their true self, you really see. I mean, this is what it's about. And what a service it is to be able to, you know, and to play the game. I mean, for me, it's a game. I used to love crossword puzzles, you know. This is it's kind of an anagram game for me. I love it. You know, you take this one, you put it over here, and you go, oh, that's different. Because you can see that you can blend it in many different ways, always using the same thing, always beginning in the same place, and then you see what we are. We're incredible. There is so much diversity within us, so many different ways in which we can live out our uniqueness. This is how you fall in love with yourself. We are not one-dimensional. We're not. This is the not self. The not self is so one-dimensional, it's boring, frankly. I mean, I find it boring. I do everything in my life to avoid being with people. Because it's terribly boring and one-dimensional, the way in which most human beings live their lives. This is the not self. You know, in the moment that you get over here, you see, wow, we're not one-dimensional creatures at all. We're these incredible complexities with real gifts. You know, when I first started to tell people, I had this little mantra of mine, you have no choice, you are unique, love yourself. And I mean, each of them get people annoyed, but the love yourself, really, what do you mean, love yourself? Every single holy system does not teach you to love yourself. Have you ever noticed? They teach you to love God, and they teach you to love your neighbor. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never had a neighbor I've loved. Never. Never. Most of the neighbors I've had, quite frankly, I don't want to love them. I'm glad that I left them behind, whatever the case may be. I'm kidding, but, understand. There is nothing in the collective homogenized philosophy that says that loving yourself is what this should be about. It's about everything else but. And so we end up being such pathetic creatures. Oh, do you love me? I don't care. I don't need your love. No, truly, I don't care. I mean, it's nice. Love is nice. I enjoy the love of my children, and, it's nice. I got me. And I'm all alone in here. I mean, there's nobody else here but me. I had a wonderful friend of mine in Ibiza, somebody I met in my first days there, many years ago. And he introduced himself to me as God. Right? I said to him, what's your name? He said, God. And I had just come from North America, where people don't do that. And it was obvious that he was serious. And he, of course, realized that he had had exactly the right effect he wanted. I had to sort of cock my head like a Cocker Spaniel, I was like, really? And he said to me, well, let me explain that to you. He said, when I die, I'm going to take you with me. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take everything with me. Which, of course, is true. I mean, it's true. I make up the world every day. So do you. And how you make it up really makes a difference. I mean, if you're not self, the world you make up is really a mess. But if you're true self, you're God. I mean, I am my own God. I worship me. I mean, I don't bow down and genuflect. I don't have to anymore. I'm just really content to be the God of my raw world. Because that's, after all, what it's about. See, the ultimate authority that humanity has to transcend is spiritual authority. The lie of spiritual authority. That your salvation has to do with Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad or all of that crap. It's up to you. It's entirely up to you. It's your authority, nobody else's. And you see, you don't get to be this unless this is you as a God. This is your movie. You make it all up. As I take you all in when I leave this plane, I will take you all with me. I will take the whole world with me. I take the universe with me. Because it's all in here. It's just in here. The thing is for us to stop making up what we think our lives are and start living them and see what our lives are. See it. Now, I didn't start as a baby either. I started at my midlife. You can transcend all of that old conditioning, all of that self-hatred. You can transcend the homogenized. But to be your own authority, that is what it's all about. You bow down to nothing but your own truth. When you live your nature, everyone becomes special. I mean, that's what it's about. This is the fulfillment of what it is to be human. Take this in very deep. Look at everybody in your life this way. Begin to see the sadness that is there around you, the lack of truth, the lack of integrity, Begin to realize that those people who do not approach you correctly, that they will never approach you correctly, that they are not for you. That those beings that are diametrically opposed to what is correct for you, that they do not belong in your life. They do not. And to begin to see that those that do treat you according to your nature, those are beings that are worthy. And you'll find out of that the values that you need in your relationships, whatever they mean, for whatever they are. It's your standard. You set the rules. Nobody else has a right to set those rules. Nobody. Nobody. And remember, no mental decisions.